have an explanation of what Mueller has. I really want that because I don't think he has much. You responded today to Mueller's latest request, and you think this could be over by September. Let's start with the request. Well, I think if it isn't over by September, then we have a very, very serious violation of the Justice Department rules that you shouldn't be conducting one of these investigations in a 60-day period.
As you know, that's not actually accurate. There is a DOJ custom not to make public disclosures about investigations within 60 days of an election, but there's no DOJ rule that every investigation needs to be shut down within 60 days of an election.
Of course, not one that is imminent or one that has to be done or some serious loss of evidence could take place. But there is a Justice Department practice, and he's bound by it, that to the best you can, you shouldn't be carrying these things on right before an election.
And that was President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, making the case for the Russia investigation to wrap up by this month. Midterm elections are now just weeks away, and Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation is still going on. Last week, former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos was sentenced to 14 days in prison and 12 months of supervised release for lying to the FBI about his contacts with foreign nationals during the campaign. And last month, President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was found guilty on 5 counts of tax fraud, 1 count of failing to disclose his foreign bank accounts, and 2 counts of bank fraud in Mueller's probe. Keir Dugal and Miriam Baer are here. Keir is a former assistant U.S. attorney in New York's Eastern District, and Miriam is a law professor at Brooklyn Law School and a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Thanks to both of you for being with us. We just heard Rudy Giuliani making the case for wrapping this up. Are there any specific laws on the books to a timeline for a DOJ investigation?
No, and I think he's not making the greatest case because he's making it way too broadly. There certainly is no argument for saying you may not have any investigation ongoing whatsoever within 60 days of an election. What there is a very strong policy, first of all, that you shouldn't in any way try to influence an election, and also that you generally shouldn't, if possible, not announce charges close to an election. But that's a far cry from saying you're not allowed to investigate anything within 60 days of an
Because
election.
we saw James Comey do this, correct, Keir?
Yeah, so that's correct. The rule is you can't interfere, but that leaves a lot of open territory. So if you do need to take investigative steps within the period before an election, you take them. For instance, the Manafort trial in Washington is going to go forward because that's when it was scheduled.
Right. I'm glad you brought up Paul Manafort's trial because it's scheduled to begin next week. Now, the judge has ruled there can be no discussion of Russian collusion in this case. Is that correct? Why should we care about this trial?
Well, it's still serious, and I think one thing we've seen is that FARA registrations, these are these registrations that we tell lobbyists to file when they're representing a foreign principal. That's serious stuff, so we should care about that if someone like Paul Manafort is representing Ukraine and either not being above board about it or even being misleading in whatever filings he does file. Those are serious charges we should care about.
But some say, these are serious charges, but perhaps not always brought to this level of, scrutiny. Would you agree with that, Keir?
No, I think that the charges are very serious, and because there are multiple millions of dollars involved. There's money laundering involved, use of the banks to launder money out of foreign accounts that were undisclosed. This is serious stuff. What I'm looking to see, and I think we all are likely to be interested to see, is we're now going to see the first part of the Manafort story. What we saw in Virginia was the second part. It was sort of what happened after his business empire crumbled. We're now going to see what led up to that collapse that was the subject of the trial in Virginia. And he had a large number, or an interesting number, let's say, of Russian contacts that I think are going to be disclosed in in the trial that we're about to see.
Interesting, the genesis of the Paul Manafort story.
Right.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. As you know, President Trump has been highly critical, very publicly critical of his Attorney General. In your mind, is there a case to be made for obstruction of justice in what the president has tweeted, Mariam?
Well, at the end of the day, what matters is the special counsel's mind.
Sure.
But, I think what we're reaching is the tweets at this point, if anything, they just draw the ire of Mr. Sessions' defenders, who include a number of Republican senators. And so at this rate, I'm not even sure I would call it obstruction so much as sort of political suicide, because at some point, these tweets just so harm him with the very audience that, frankly, he needs to keep in his corner, that it's almost a little bit beside the point.
But beyond harming him with his audience, Keir, which is clearly, he's very concerned with his audience, do these tweets harm him legally?
Well, the other person whose sort of mental state I think is an issue here, beyond Attorney General Sessions, is President Trump himself. And so, he has arguably taken actions which would perhaps disrupt or interrupt the investigation. You can make the argument. And so the question then becomes, why did he do that? And I think that's a question that's been pretty broadly asked in the media, and one that we're going to learn what Mr. Mueller has on that issue.
Well, speaking of, based on what we've seen unfold in the past few weeks, what clues do we have into the direction the Mueller investigation may be taking?
Well, we could see several things happen. First of all, his team has this trial to focus on. So one thing we're going to expect them to do is really focus on that trial. And it will be interesting to see the information that comes out of that trial. So that's sort of the first thing. The next question would be, will we see more indictments related either to hacking of computers or related to, what we think of as the nitty-gritty. For example, the meeting in Trump Tower. Those kinds of questions really haven't been answered yet.
Well, we've seen the indictments of Russians, involved in the hacking and in the interference. Do you think we could see then the indictments of Americans related to that Russian hacking?
Yeah, I think that's the big question right now. And, some of the timing is very suspect. Some of the actions that the Russian hackers took, also with the sort of social media campaign, the timing is very concerning, because it seems to have, you can make the argument that the timing was particularly beneficial, came at critical moments that seemed to give the appearance that they had some inside help.
Now, let's just say that this implicates, not the inner circle, but the outer circle. Let's just say, we're speculating. Is that still significant?
Oh, it could. Well, first of all, the person who, he himself has raised this is Roger Stone, right? And so that person sort of sits on a very interesting place there, because he's not, maybe he's not in the Trump administration, but he certainly is seen as inner circle, as in someone who had direct access to Donald Trump and spoke to President Trump. So I think if he's indicted, and certainly there's some suggestion that he might be, and he himself says he thinks he's next.
Right.
I think that will be very interesting, because the question will be, is he indicted by himself? Is he indicted as part of a group? And whatever group received these hacked emails, that's where we really want to look next.
There's some speculation that perhaps even family members could face indictment. I mean, we have to see what Mueller has. Now, there's obviously, Rudy Giuliani has been on the talk shows, has been sort of waging a PR campaign, if you will, against the Mueller investigation, or at least against the timeline, and trying to get it wrapped up. He also seems to suggest that the president will answer questions from Mueller's team on a written basis, but not in a live interview. Do you think that that's likely to happen?
Well, our source for that information is not, as I understand it, it's not Mueller's office, it's Mr. Trump's team. So I think we've heard a lot of things that haven't come true. Some things have, but so we need to take a little grain of salt with it.
Sure.
As a former prosecutor, it would never have been my preference to take evidence from a witness by written question. You can't see their reaction, you can't follow up, you can't judge their credibility. So it is certainly a less intrusive way of getting information from a witness, and perhaps Mr. Mueller's team are trying to be particularly deferential. As I understand it, the willingness, or at least the consideration of written questions, is not precluding them from a decision to take actual testimony later.
Right. And I think also it's important to point out, so when you get written questions, you both give written questions and you receive those answers, you have to remember you're getting the answers not necessarily of just the witness, but quite frankly, it's the witness and whoever assisted the witness, mainly the attorney. And
Carefully edited answers.
yes, right. I mean, that's your concern. On the
Yeah.
other hand, it does lock the witness in.
Sure.
The witness presumably is going to sign that, saying
Right.
this is my...
There's less
right.
wiggle room out of a written statement than there is out of a verbal statement. Isn't
In
that
some
right?
ways,
Even though there
yes.
isn't maybe there's not much out of a verbal statement. But
In some ways, yes, and so it will be interesting to see. Now, that being said, I could easily see President Trump walk away from the written statement and say, well, I didn't mean it that way, etc.
Right.
But it does lock you in. It locks you into whatever story it is you want to tell.
Miriam, Kier, thanks to both of you for your expertise. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you.